Good day everyone. This is for educational use only. So our group is allowing our instructor, Mr. Roldan Ardinas, to use this as an educational material. So without further ado, let's start. So our topic is all about introduction to the study of globalization by Manfred Stiger. So, what is globalization all about?
Every day, we knowingly or unknowingly experience globalization, the worldwide movement of people, ideas, money, goods, data, drugs, weapons, computer and biological viruses, greenhouse gases, and more. This isn't new. People and goods have always moved around the world. The Silk Road, a network of trade routes stretching from the Mediterranean Sea to East Asia, facilitated the spread of fabrics, spices, art, weapons, technology, ideas, and disease over thousands of years. What is new, however, is the scale, velocity, and range of these flows across borders. Think about the speed at which an infectious disease like Ebola or Zika can spread around the world, or the reach of a financial contagion like the crisis of 2008. Look at your smartphone and think about the global coordination it took to produce. The interconnectedness of the modern world allows ideas, behaviors, styles, products, and news to spread more quickly and broadly than during any other period of history. But globalization's effects are complex. What represents an upside for some people might represent a downside for others. Technology, for example, allows billions of people to contact friends and access news from around the world. International supply chains, the networks that turn raw materials into finished items, produce and distribute goods more quickly and cheaply than ever. But the pace of technological innovation has also led to the automation of manufacturing processes, which eliminates jobs. Trade is another example. Between 1970 and 2015, global exports and imports of goods each multiplied more than 50 times. More imports lead to increased consumer choices and reduced prices, and more trade can strengthen ties between trading partners and promote peace, security, and growth. But more trade opportunities and technological advances mean many corporations choose to shift their operations to countries where the labor and natural resources are cheaper. And the individuals and companies that can take advantage of international resources experience outsized gains, which widens the growing gap between the rich and the poor. The effects of globalization, both negative and positive, are a reality. No one can opt out entirely. But governments have many options for responding. They can choose how open or closed they want to be towards trade, investment, visitors, immigrants, refugees, internet traffic, and more. Governments can also contend with globalization through collective rather than national responses. A set of international institutions and other arrangements has emerged to manage globalization. Although some countries view globalization as a threat to local identity, culture, or social and political norms, no country can be entirely self-sufficient. The challenge is for individual governments and the world collectively to promote globalization's benefits while effectively helping the individuals and countries that globalization hurts the most.
Well, basically, globalization is the process of improving global markets through trade liberalization and free market integration so that services, goods, and capital can travel freely across boundaries. The term globalization describes how throughout time the world has become more interconnected on an economical, political, social, and cultural level. It is the deepening of social links that connect distant locals in such a way that local events are impacted by events occurring thousands of miles away and vice versa. It is it is like an evolution, a matrix of social processes that is transforming our present social condition and conventional nationality into one of globality. As what Manfred Steger's article said, it aims to establish the globalism not only represents a set of political ideas and beliefs coherent enough to warrant the status of a new ideology, but also constitutes the dominated ideology of our time, against which all of its challengers much define themselves.
Objectives are is to discover Manfred's ideology of globalization, to verify Michael Frieden's sentiments, to know Arjun Odore's contributions, and to classify the escapes of globalization.
Good day. Let us talk about the main qualities of globalization. First, we have connectivity. This answers the question, how does globalization promote interconnectedness? Cultural and economic globalization have caused countries to become more connected politically. Countries frequently cooperate to enact trade agreements. They work together to open their borders to allow the movement of money and people needed to keep economic globalization work. Best example would be increased trade between countries and changes in transport and communication technology.
The second qualities of globalization are mobility. Globalization seems likely to lead to income growth at the high end of the skill spectrum, but may be decreased rates of upward mobility among less skilled workers, both in absolute terms and in comparison to their high skilled peers. The last one is the qualities of the globalization is imagination. Is that it is a continuous economic process driven both fundamental economic policy changes by individual, government, and technical innovation.
Elements of globalization. The first element, people. People, of course, we already talked about tourists, refugees, business travelers who cross borders in larger numbers and faster than ever before. And the second element, ideas. Ideas, information, data. Think of the digital media, especially the social media, as a wonderful example of this embodied globalization. And the third element, things. Things that are moving, expand, and interconnecting. Example, very large tradable commodities in ships in large containers that really make the world go around. And the fourth element, organization. Organization, transactional corporation, Microsoft that reach the world, churches that are multiplying, popping up on different continents, clubs like sports, and etc. Criteria for measuring globalization. Extensity. It answers the question, how far does it reach? Globalization reaches worldwide. Intensity. How much is moving in terms of data? Velocity. How fast global flows. Interconnectedness being measured in terms of the pace. Impact. can measure global interconnectedness in terms of how forceful and how powerful it is.
Manfred's ideology of globalization. What is globalization? It is about expanding our social and traditional and geographical connections across different countries and the world. Globalization has no time limit and it has no boundaries. So, globalization is a word describes the word growth of the world's economic, culture, and population brought about by cross-border trades in goods and service technology. So, globalization has no limits because everything you can think of, you can do, right? So, globalization has no boundaries. Every time you think, whatever you think, you can apply it or you can make what you think. That is globalization about. It's about growth in economies, in our culture, in population. It's about growth. Globalization is about growth. Overall, Manfred Steger's ideology of globalization underscores the complex. He does not take strictly positive and negative about globalization, rather aims to provide a comprehensive understanding of the various dimensions and consequences of this global phenomenon. So, globalization is like nature, like you're upgrading something. Something is growing. You want to make something. That is globalization. You want to make changes to our economy, our culture, or everything you can think of. It has no limitation and no boundaries. That is globalization. Globalization is an ongoing process that involves interconnected changes in the economic, culture, social, and political spheres of society. It is associated with integration of these aspects between nations, regions, communities, and even isolated places. Some examples of globalization are Hollywood or Bollywood films being released around the world, McDonald's catering to the local population by adapting typical products. Last, worldwide flow and integration of culture, media, technology due to advances in communication system and economics interests.
This article argues that globalism not only represents a set of political ideas and beliefs current enough to warrant the status of a new ideology, but also serve as dominant ideology of our time, against which all of its challengers must define themselves. So, political ideology, most viewers will have the vague idea that concepts like fascism, communism, anarchism, liberalism, and conservatism are examples of ideologies which would be correct idea to have. This article takes issues with Michael Frieden's skeptic assessment that it is far too early to pronounce on globalism status. As an ideology, the main body of this essay focuses on three criteria proposed by Frieden to evaluate the ideological maturity of globalism after carefully analyzing the difference between frequently conflated phrases containing the concept of globalization. It suggested that its conceptual structure be broken down into a collection of 6 basic claims rather than just core, adjacent, and peripheral notions.
Michael Frieden is a professor at the Department of Politics and International Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. He is also Emeritus of Professorial Fellow at Mansfield College, Oxford, between 2013 and 2015. He was professor at Political Theory in the School of Politics and International Relations at the University of Nottingham. He is leading theorist of ideology and the founding editor of the Journal of Political Ideologies. Frieden has been known for his analysis of contemporary ideologies. He has rejected the traditional definition of ideologies, which sees the latter as static belief system, and instead bases his analysis on modern semantics. Just like language, ideologies consist of certain concepts whose meaning may change and evolve over time. The specific relations between ideological concepts may be analyzed by being set their respective semantic fields. Some of his works are The New Liberalism and Ideology of Social Reform. Liberalism divided a study in British political to 1914 to 1939. J. A. Hobson, A Reader. Minutes of Rainbow Circle, 1894 to 1934. Edited and annotated. Reappraising J. A. Hobson, Humanism and Welfare. Rights, Ideologies and Political Theory, a conceptual approach, reassessing political ideologies, the durability of dissent. Ideology, a very short introduction, liberal language, ideological imagination, and 20th century progressive, taking ideology seriously, 21st century. The political theory of political thinking, the anatomy of a practice, liberalism, a very short introduction.
So what is Arjun Appadurai's contribution to the study of globalization? Particularly his CAPES framework and his exploration of the global cultural economy have played a significant role in shaping the ideologies and concepts of globalization. As mentioned in the previous response, Appadurai introduced the idea of scapes to describe the multiple dimensions of globalization. These scapes include ethnoscapes, movement of people, technoscapes, movement of technology, financescapes, movement of capital, and mediascapes, movement of media, and lastly the ideoscape, or the movement of ideas. This framework helps in analyzing the complex and interconnected nature of global processes. We're going to talk about the ethnoscape. So, ethnoscape refers to the flow of people across boundaries. While people such as labor migrants or refugees travel out of necessity or in search of better opportunities for themselves and their families. And leisure travelers are also part in this scape. So the World Tourism Organization is a specialized branch of the United Nations, argues that tourism is one of the fastest growing commercial sectors and that approximately 1 in 11 jobs is related to tourism in some way. Tourism typically puts people from developed parts of the world in contact with people in the developing world, which creates both opportunities and challenges for all involved. While there is the potential for tourists to be positively affected by their experiences with the other, while traveling, the tourism industry has also received its shares of criticisms. Individuals from wealthier countries like the US, even if they are not that wealthy themselves by the standards of the United States, are able to indulge in luxuries while traveling abroad in poorer nations like those found in the Caribbean or like in our country. Cheaper prices, so even though
people from US are not that rich. They can enjoy enjoy luxuries. There is a fine line between tourists expecting service while on vacation and tourists treating local people like servants. This latter scenario exemplifies the unequal power relationships that develop in these kind of situations. And such power relationships concern responsible social sciences.
Good day everyone, I'm Decadet Arnold G. Torres and I'm going to discuss the technoscapes and mediascapes by Arjun Appadurai. So, technoscapes. Technoscapes or a technoscape is a term that refers to the worldwide arrangement and movement of technologies across international boundaries. So, in short, it refers to the global arrangement and movement of all sorts of technology across worldwide boundaries. They're part of the 5 different dimensions of global cultural flows proposed by anthropologist Arjun Appadurai. So this area focuses on the technology that we all use. Moreover, the term technoscapes or technoscapes also amplifies that as a consequence of this arrangement and movement of technology, information, and culture can move and mold as a result of it. So, mediascapes. Mediascapes is Appadurai wrote of the power of international media to send news information across the global at a rapid rate. So, imagine back in the 70s, when news was sent by ship across oceans, taking months to reach its intended audience. So even when Appadurai first came up with the concept of mediascapes in the 1990s, he would never have known just how far we would have come some 3 decades later. So the whispered use of internet has meant traditional news media are being challenged by agile new media companies. However, the disadvantage of new media is that these companies operate with editorial policies that may be less strict or target audience of particular biases. So, example of this is blogging. Rather than getting information from books, people can now get their news from anyone with an internet connections and a website. Second is BBC. So people around the world rely on global news outlets like the BBC to get their information. And lastly is 24-hour news. People are consuming media instantaneously using Twitter and smartphones. So this has changed news cycles and feed a global hunger for more and more news instantly.
Ageiscapes. Ageiscapes refers to the flow of ideas. This can be small scale, such as an individual posting her or his personal views on Facebook for public consumption, or it can be larger and more systematic. Examples. Ageiscapes include the notion of democracy, human rights, welfare, and so on. Ageiscapes are heavily influenced by local culture, systematics, translations, historical events, and political context. Now, can you explain to me what human rights are? Depending on where you are from, where you grow up, or your political orientation, even your cultural religious preferences, your interpretation of this term may vary quite greatly, and if you're a politician, that is doubtfully true. How so? Well, all of this ties into the concept of ageiscapes in this lesson. We first define this term and then go over an example of what it means with respect to global cultural flow. Ageiscapes are very sensitive to local conditions. This impacts global cultural flow as a result. For example, what are human rights to the US versus China? What is democracy to Canada versus the Democratic People's Republic of Korea? What is terrorist to a UK politicians versus an Iranian one? We can clearly tell by these examples that cultural upbringing, semantics, translations, local political contexts, historical events, and many other issues can influence agescapes, their presentation, interpretation, and misinterpretation within and in between different nations and cultures. This can lead to severe problems with global cultural flow if not understood in light of all of the aforementioned. Finanscape. The term finanscape derives from the global theorist Arjun Appadurai in 1996. He sees it is as one of the perils of economic globalization, defined as cross-border movements of loans, equities, direct and indirect investments on currencies that transcend the power of the nation state. One of the most important things to understand behind finanscapes is that how it influences things like global cultural flow can be difficult to pin down on its own, let alone how it interrelates to other elements of global cultural flow such as technoscapes, ethnoscapes, and agescapes. Now let's work through an example of virtual currencies to see how and why. Virtual currencies, a form of technoscapes, finanscapes, and even agescapes, have recently boomed throughout the world. On its own, the very notion of a new form of usable currency is already a novel cultural element. While the concept of virtual currency may have started to spread resolutely within the Western world at first, it soon began to spread all over the world. With these virtual currencies came numerous other cultural elements, information, and ideas.